Thank you, Judge. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hi.
You doing okay?
Yes.
You a little nervous?
Yeah.
Okay. How old are you?
I'm 17.
Okay. And what is your full name?
Mackenzie Ann Gooden.
And are you in school right now?
Yes.
And where do you go to school at?
Poland Seminary High School.
And what year are you?
I'm a senior.
And you have any plans for after high school?
Yes, I plan on continuing at YSU and going into the nursing program.
And do you work?
Yes, I do.
And where do you work at?
A restaurant in our town called The Rockas.
Okay. Now, the gentleman that was just in the courtroom, who is that to you?
My father.
Okay. And who's your mother?
Her name is Patricia Gooden, or Patricia Dobis.
Okay. That's her new name.
She got married. I don't know her new name now.
Okay. That's her maiden name then?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother named Darren Gooden. He is 19, and I have 4 stepsisters.
Okay. Now, and you're living in Ohio at the time, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were born there, I assume, right?
Yes.
Okay. And back several years ago, I'm going to take you back to like around 2010, 2011. You would have been about 12 years old, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us, well, let me ask you first, do you know the man named Leon Jacob?
Yes.
Okay. And could you tell us, or tell the jury how you know him?
I knew him through my mom.
Okay. And how was it that you came to know him, if you could tell us?
He was introduced to me as my mother's friend.
And were you aware at the time of your parents being separated? Do you remember that when your father moved out of the house?
Yes, I do.
Was it around the same time that this happened? He was introduced into your life?
Around that time, yes.
Okay. And what sort of interactions did you have with the defendant during that time period, if you could tell us?
He would come over, and we would go out to certain places and dinner and stuff.
Okay. And what did you think of him when you met him?
Well, I couldn't understand why he was around us so much when he had like a wife and stuff. I couldn't wrap my head around that.
Okay. Now, when you say you didn't understand why he was around your family so much when he had a wife. Did you know his wife?
Yes.
And who was that?
Her name was Annie.
Okay. How was it that you knew who his wife was?
I was introduced to her through Leon and my mom. We went over there multiple occasions, having dinner together.
So at the time you were little, you didn't really understand why this guy was over here when he had his own wife.
Correct.
And he had a child at the time, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What was your understanding about the nature of the relationship with your mother? Did you know anything more than just friends?
To me, it seemed a lot different. It did seem like they were more than friends, but when I would question either or, they would tell me that I was like just a child. I didn't know any better. Of course, they were just friends, and so on.
Now, the man that we're talking about as Leon Jacob, do you see him here in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Okay. Could you go ahead and just identify him by something that he's wearing?
Blue tie.
Okay. Right over here to my right?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that witnesses identify the defendant?
The record will so reflect.
And what do you remember about the time you spent with your mother versus the time you spent with your father at that time? Do you remember what the visitation was like with your dad?
Well, when I was with my mom, it was a lot different. When I went to my dad's, I wouldn't stay there very often because they would always tell me certain things to like come back to them, or run away in a sense. And like if I would, they would like take me out to dinner or certain instances like that.
Okay. When you say they told me to come back, they told me to run away from my dad's, who are you referring to as they?
Leon and my mother.
Okay. And was Mr. Jacob living with you all at the time?
It seemed that way.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
He would sleep over a lot. I would see him more often.
Did you ever see him in the mornings when you just woke up, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay. What sort of things did you see about? Well, let me ask you. Were you present when there were any arguments between him and your mother?
Yes.
What was the relationship like between him and your mom, if you remember? Was there a lot of arguments?
Yes, there were.
Okay. And what sort of things do you remember about those arguments involving the defendant?
I just remember being scared in a sense because when he would get angry, he would get very angry, and it wasn't just like a normal fight between like a couple. It would be like a screaming match, and I just remember like faces like being red and angry and stuff like that.
Do you remember an incident involving your brother and the defendant?
Yes, I do.
Could you tell us about what happened?
It was one of the day of my dad's visitations, and there was a conversation. I came downstairs. I didn't want to go to my dad's because of all the things that they had told me about him, like lies and stuff, and made me really not like my dad at the time, which all were not true. And I went downstairs. They were talking. Leon and my mother were talking about like a dinner that they were going to, and like kind of rubbing it in my face, me being a 12-year-old wanting to go to a nice fancy restaurant. And so we went to my dad's for visitation, and then my brother and I decided to run back to my mother's house. And when we did so, we got there, and they kind of like needed a reason as to why we ran away. So they needed to like
What happened? Yeah.
okay, they needed to like stage something like as if like my dad did something, so they decided to punch my brother in the chest.
Okay. You said they decided to punch your brother. Who actually punched your brother?
Leon did.
Okay. And did you see that happen?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And could you describe for us how he did that?
Well, we were in my back room, and he had one shoulder on my brother, and he just like went right into his chest.
Okay. And your brother was how old at the time?
About 14, 15.
And you said you saw him strike your brother in the chest. Do you remember how many times he did it?
I remember at least once or twice.
Okay. And did your brother react to that at all? Did he say ouch, or did he bend
He kind of
over?
toppled over like when you get hit in the stomach.
And were you aware of the police being called or anything regarding that?
No, I do not remember.
Okay. Now, sometime later, your father got full custody of you and your brother, right?
Yes,
And do you remember the last time that you saw the defendant?
I do.
Okay, could you tell us about that?
So we were swimming at my house. It was about 3 days before I was going to start my 7th grade year, and Leon was over with his son, and we were playing in the pool. And then my mom got this email, and she began to just kind of get mad. They had like a fight, and so he ended up getting kicked out of my house. And then we locked the door, and he was kind of like had James on his shoulder, running around the house, like saying,
Yeah, you
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, she's typing everything you're saying. So
Okay.
you're a talker, I know. So
Yeah.
just try and slow it down.
Okay.
I'm going to stop you and ask another question. Okay, you said he had James with him. Who's
Yes.
James?
His son.
Okay, and do you remember how old James was at the time?
I want to say 2.
He's a little kid.
Yeah, very.
And you said I think you said he had James with him. He was holding him, and what was he doing?
He was running around my house, knocking on the door, trying to get me to let him in.
Okay. And did you?
I did not.
What happened after that?
I remember briefly he tried to go around the back, but we also had locked that door. And then I remember him driving off in his car.
And was that the last time you'd ever seen him?
Yes.
Okay. Until today?
Yes.
I'll pass it with this judge.
Another pass, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, Mackenzie. My name is Matthew Pospisil. Just going to have a couple of quick questions for you. Now, I understand during this time that you first met Leon, your parents were going through a divorce. That's correct?
Yes.
And they were fighting over custody of both you and Darren?
Yes.
So emotions were pretty tense between both parties, would you agree? Between your father and your mother?
Yes.
Now, I know you said that during this time there were a lot of arguments, screaming matches that would take place between Leon and Patricia, or Patty. It's fair to say that it takes two people to have a fight, would you agree?
Yes.
And that it's not just always one person?
Yes.
Now, your father has full custody of you now, correct?
Yes.
So you live with him?
Yes.
And is he still with Holly?
Yes,
Do you like Holly now?
I do, very much.
But at first you weren't the craziest about her, were you?
That was because I was told things that were untrue
But at first you weren't her biggest fan.
because of the things I was told.
Right, but so my question is, you weren't her biggest fan, is that correct?
Because of the things I was told.
Would you please respond to that question, yes or no?
Yes,
You were not her biggest fan of Holly.
yes.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you witnessed Leon punch Darren. Why didn't you call the cops at that time, or the police?
I was told I didn't know any better. I mean, I was just told of the things that were surrounding me. I mean,
But the thought never occurred that maybe the police might need to get involved?
yes, the thought had occurred.
Do you still have contact with Patricia at all?
No,
At this time of this divorce, was Patty drinking alcohol?
yes,
Do you know if she was ever using any kind of other drugs?
I do not.
Was she drinking quite heavily?
I do not remember.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Pass.
Yes, Your Honor, pass.
Just briefly, Judge. Mackenzie, do you remember anything about the defendant in regards to seeing him drinking alcohol, smelling like alcohol, anything like that?
Yes,
Okay, could you tell us about that?
I felt like every time that he would come over, he always smelled like alcohol.
Did that concern you?
It did, yes.
I'll pass the witness, Judge.
Nothing further, Your Honor.